So Joe Rogan is the host of the podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. I think some of you might have heard of it, but those of you who aren't or who haven't, that's basically what he is. He's what he does, and he has a lot of different people on his podcast, right? So now recently, Rogan hosted Senator and presidential candidate Bernie Sanders on his podcast. Now, in this discussion, they talked about a lot of different things: universal health care, gun control, debate format, money in politics, and yes, they even talked about aliens, which I found fascinating. So now, I think it was a really good discussion. I listened to it last night, the whole hour. I suggest everyone else take a listen to it because actually it was really good. And because it was good, it actually got an incredibly good reception on social media and on YouTube, surprisingly. And this is interesting considering that a lot of his audience, yes, they do kind of go across the political spectrum, but it does tend to tilt to the right, lean to the right just a little bit. And to see even right-wingers, people who are his audience, have a positive reception of Bernie Sanders is actually really interesting. Nonetheless, Rogan, like I said, has gotten a lot of praise for having Bernie Sanders on, and so has Bernie Sanders for going on his program. In fact, here you have Emma Vigeland, right? Now, Emma Vigeland is TYT's own correspondent for TYT. She said, such a smart move by Bernie Sanders' team to have him go on Joe Rogan. Traditional political types might scoff at it, and believe me, they have. But Rogan's reach to independents, conservatives, and liberals is enormous. He's a humanizing, fascinating interviewer, even if I don't always agree with him. And I think that's a perfect take, right? Rogan, look, he says things that I agree with. He says things that I disagree with. Some people say that he's a gateway to the alt-right. He has a lot of terrible people on and sometimes doesn't necessarily challenge them, or sometimes agrees with them, but also sometimes disagrees with them. Like, for example, when he talked about immigration. And so, look, he's kind of a mixed bag, right? But you can't deny that he's also had some really awesome people on his show that he has had really good conversations with. Let me give you a couple of examples. Kyle Kalinske of Secular Talk, Cornel West, and now, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders. And during these discussions, they are actually having substantive, interesting discussions. Now, one of the best parts, by the way, is near the beginning when Bernie Sanders was talking about the debate format. He said that, in effect, this whole debate format, on the CNN debates that they recently had, they were a bit dehumanizing, and they turned a debate into a game of basically who can come up with the best soundbite. Now, that's not conducive to making good substantive policy arguments. You can't do that in 12 seconds. So that's a perfectly good point, and it's an excellent, valid point, and actually makes the case that the debate formats are broken, and not only that, but that the Democratic field is way too large. So there are some issues with that, right? So now in the debate format, like I said, I would rather have a long-form, hour-long discussion and watch that than watch a debate where everybody's talking over each other, where you have the moderators that are talking over people that are giving, terrible framing on some of these questions, even framing from the pharmaceutical industry that happened. This was also mentioned on the podcast. And so I would rather have that hour-long free-flowing discussion than that. Because I think that hurts discourse. That actually hurts the candidates in the long run. And it makes it all about who can trap somebody in a gotcha question or a soundbite, which is why we saw so much, about Kamala Harris getting Bernie Sanders and then Tulsi Gabbard getting Kamala Harris. And so there's that. Now, this, of course, led to a lot of positive responses on their YouTube comment section, which always surprises me because YouTube comment sections can be pretty terrible. Now, one YouTube user wrote this, quote, "All politics aside, it's incredible that this style of interview happened. Hats off to Bernie for coming on the show. It was nice to hear what he actually thinks without talking heads interrupting." Yes, Agreed. Um, I couldn't agree more. Now, another YouTube user wrote this. You can disagree with this man, fine. I do too on several issues, and that's fine. But I have to respect a presidential candidate that will sit down at this length and answer the questions he's getting asked. A lot harder to say nothing for 1.5 hours than it is for 45 seconds. And again, that's why I think this was a great idea. He got to expose millions of listeners. I think, what is it, 3 million, 4 million views now? He got to expose all these people to Bernie Sanders' ideas. Now, that is not what people on TV's interpretation of his ideas are, or what you see more often, misrepresentations and falsehoods spread by political pundits who, quote unquote, analyze Bernie Sanders and his policy proposals. No, you get to actually hear it from him himself. And hearing him explain what he wants to do, how he's going to do it, there is some real value there. Now, that said, I didn't like some of Joe's framing. I think he comes at it a little bit from a more slightly right-wing perspective, and that's fine. I can disagree with that, but the questions actually were really good. It was a very solid interview. Good questions, excellent answers. One of the answers that I didn't like from Bernie Sanders, to be 100% honest, is when he was asked about the legalization of all drugs, and he wasn't there. And I think we'll look at what Portugal did, right? They had a lot of success with legalization of all drugs. Use of these drugs actually went down, and deaths from these drugs went way down. And in this interview, we did get to hear him explain why he has that position, and so you can understand, right? And not only that, but he got to explain why he holds all these different positions. And like I keep saying, it's not radical. These positions are not radical. A majority of the country actually agrees that these are mainstream, practical ideas. Rogan even said during the interview that his ideas don't seem as radical as mainstream news tends to portray them. So, look, I don't want to just tell you about it. I suggest that you give it a listen. It's just over an hour. It's really good. I recommend it. But let me tell you about my favorite part, right? So that came at the end of the show, where Rogan was asking Sanders about aliens, about UFOs. Specifically asking, hey, if you're president, will you tell us about the UFOs? Will you tell us about the aliens? Now, anybody who knows me knows that I love that question. I love that topic. That is my burning question. Literally. Are there the aliens? Tell me about the aliens. Have we been in contact? So that's interesting. And you'll have to tune in to, of course, see his answer. But overall, let me just end it by saying that I way prefer this format over the so-called debate format, and I hope Bernie Sanders does more of these sit-down, long-form interviews. I think it's great that he's doing it, and I also, hope that more people will watch them to really get more of a sense of who he is. And I also think that, Rogan should have other politicians on, or every politician on, that have Kamala Harris, have her explain her situation. Tulsi, he might have already had Tulsi Gabbard, but I'm not entirely sure. Have Beto O'Rourke, right? So give all of these candidates a chance to explain their positions so that we get to know them and we get to know why they are, the way they are, why they feel certain ways on certain positions. Hell, I'd even watch one on John Delaney. Just because, not because I find John Delaney interesting, but I do want to know why he, is where he is. And also, I want to see just what kind of lame way he will try to defend his stances on us not having anything. But I think most importantly, it's very important to go outside, to be able to go outside of the corporate mainstream media and to do these types of interviews and to have this information available. Give it a listen, give it a watch, and see what this is all about. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc. We're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYT Nation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYT Nation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.